At 6:10 on a Monday morning, I found an excavator biting into the bank of Alder Creek, the narrow stream that had watered Cedar Hollow Ranch for 3 generations. A fresh trench ran east toward Crescent Lake, the private centerpiece of Silver Pines estates. Muddy water rushed through an orange culvert, while the creek below my pasture shrank to a trickle. Valerie Cross, the HOA president, stood beside the machine in a white blazer and spotless boots, holding a laminated site map. "This is an approved drainage correction," she said. "I told the operator to stop until someone produced a recorded right or a valid permit." Valerie refused. She claimed the HOA controlled every water channel feeding its lake, even though the excavation sat nearly 200 feet inside my deeded boundary. Then I noticed the contractor hiding a county-stamped plan beneath his clipboard. The plan showed a blue line, but it did not follow the trench they had just dug. That mismatch would become the first crack in a much larger lie. The operator eased his bucket to the ground and killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, I could hear water hammering through the culvert and cattle bawling from the lower pasture. Valerie stepped toward the cab and ordered him to finish opening the channel. He looked from her to me, uncertain which person carried the greater risk. "You are standing on Cedar Hollow Ranch," I said. "I have not given anyone permission to dig here." Valerie raised the laminated map as if the plastic itself settled the matter. She said Silver Pines had maintained the lake and its feeder channels for years. Alder Creek had never been a feeder channel, but arguing beside an excavator would not prove that. I took out my phone and began building a record. I photographed the machine number, the contractor's truck, both license plates, the orange culvert, the spoil piles, and every set of tire tracks crossing my fence opening. I filmed the water above and below the cut, then placed a steel fence post beside the shrinking channel so the depth could be compared later. My phone marked each image with time and location. The foreman finally told Valerie he would not restart without written confirmation. While she called someone from the board, I moved close enough to photograph the sheet under his clipboard. Its county stamp was real, or looked real, but the blue drainage line curved south, while their trench ran east toward Crescent Lake. By the time the crew drove away, the new channel was still carrying most of Alder Creek through that bright orange pipe. I stood at the drying cattle crossing and watched the water line fall against the steel post. If the county had truly approved this project, why did its own plan point in the opposite direction? I stayed at the crossing until the steel post showed another inch of exposed mud. Alder Creek had never been a wide river, but on Cedar Hollow Ranch it did 3 jobs no photograph could fully explain. It watered the lower pasture, kept the cattle crossing firm enough for the herd, and fed a shallow side pool we used during the driest weeks of summer. By noon, all 3 were changing. My grandfather bought the first section of Cedar Hollow in 1958. My father added neighboring acreage whenever a family wanted to sell, and by the time the ranch passed to me, it covered 480 acres. The oldest deed described Alder Creek as a natural boundary reference before it turned south through the center pasture. None of our records said the creek belonged to us as water. They did show that the banks, crossing, and ground the HOA had excavated were inside our property. That distinction mattered. I was not claiming the right to trap every gallon that passed through the ranch. I was objecting to strangers entering my land, cutting a new channel, and moving the flow toward a private lake without permission. The lower herd reached the crossing before lunch. Several cows stepped into the softening edge and backed away when the bank collapsed under their hooves. I closed the pasture gate and moved 34 head north through a narrow service lane. It took most of the afternoon and cost me a section of grazing I had planned to rest. By sunset, the north lane was churned into dust. One calf had scraped a leg against the temporary panel, and the herd was crowded into a pasture meant for half that number. Nothing was catastrophic yet, but every hour of diverted water was creating another cost the HOA would later call imaginary. The next morning, I rented 2 portable water tanks and began keeping receipts. I also took new photographs from the same positions I had marked the day before. The steel post made the decline visible. Where water had once covered its bottom 12 inches, only wet gravel remained. At the ranch office, I opened the fireproof cabinet that held 3 generations of closing papers, surveys, insurance files, and tax records. I found the current deed, an older boundary description, aerial photographs from before Silver Pines Estates was built, and the title policy from my last refinancing. Alder Creek curved south in every image. I found no drainage easement benefiting Silver Pines, no access agreement, and no document giving its board permission to maintain anything on Cedar Hollow. Valerie supplied her written version that afternoon. A courier delivered a letter on Silver Pines letterhead accusing me of obstructing historic watershed access. It stated that the HOA could enter any feeder channel serving Crescent Lake, and warned that interference might expose me to the cost of restoring the project. I read the letter twice, then called Grace Nolan, a civil property attorney who had handled a fence line dispute for a neighboring ranch. "Do not pull that culvert," she told me after reviewing the photographs. "If they created the condition, we preserve it before anyone changes it." Grace asked for every deed, photograph, receipt, and message in my possession. By evening, she had compared the legal description with the map attached to Valerie's letter. The attachment carried the same county stamp I had seen beneath the foreman's clipboard. In one corner was a reference number for a subdivision drainage plan approved in 2004. The number looked legitimate. The drawing around it did not. On the HOA attachment, a heavy blue line ran east from Alder Creek toward Crescent Lake, but beneath that line, faint marks showed what appeared to be an older route curving south. Grace enlarged the scan and studied it in silence. "Before we argue about rights," she said, "we need the original plan." The county records office opened at 8 the next morning. I arrived 10 minutes early with the reference number written on the back of Valerie's letter. At 8 sharp, a clerk unlocked the glass doors and directed me to the planning counter. I handed the reference number to Elise Harper, a county planner. She entered the number, frowned at her screen, and disappeared into the archive room. She returned carrying a flat file nearly 3 feet wide. Inside was the approved 2004 drainage plan for Silver Pines Estates. Elise spread it across the counter and held the corners down with metal rulers. The original blue line marked Alder Creek, where it crossed Cedar Hollow Ranch, then curved south exactly as it did on my deeds and aerial photographs. Crescent Lake sat several hundred yards east, connected only to drainage swales drawn within the subdivision. The paper smelled of dust, and a red approval seal sat several inches away from the blue route the HOA had completely redrawn. "This plan does not show your creek feeding that lake," Elise said. I placed Valerie's attachment beside it. The HOA version used the same project number and copied the county approval stamp, but its thick eastbound line covered the original southbound route. Elise would not call it fraudulent without a formal review. She did confirm that the altered drawing was not the plan stored in the county's official file. The permit linked to the stamp created another problem for Silver Pines. It authorized replacement of a failing culvert beside the HOA clubhouse. Its site coordinates, dimensions, and inspection notes referred to a short internal drainage swale. Nothing in the application mentioned Alder Creek, Cedar Hollow Ranch, or excavation on land outside the subdivision. Elise certified copies of the original plan and permit record. Before I left, she submitted an inspection request based on my photographs. The county could compare permitted work with the site, she explained, but it could not decide property rights. Grace agreed. The county file was powerful, but we still needed to locate the excavation against the recorded legal description. She hired Jordan Vega, a licensed surveyor who arrived at Cedar Hollow the following morning with a robotic total station, 2 assistants, and copies of every deed exhibit I owned. Jordan began at an undisturbed iron monument near the southwest fence, then worked through 3 control points before approaching the creek. He refused to rely on the online tax map, calling it a useful index rather than a boundary survey. By late afternoon, his flagged line placed the nearest edge of the new trench 198 feet inside Cedar Hollow Ranch. He measured the disturbed bank, spoil piles, culvert, and the change in elevation between the natural creek bed and the eastbound cut. The excavator had lowered one section of bank by nearly 4 feet, creating a route that captured most of the ordinary flow before it could continue south. While he worked, a title company completed an updated search. It found no recorded drainage easement, access agreement, or water diversion grant, in favor of Silver Pines. It eliminated the recorded right Valerie had presented as obvious. The county inspector arrived before sunset. He compared the orange culvert with the dimensions in the clubhouse permit, checked the coordinates, and photographed the contractor tracks across my land. The next day, the county issued a stop work notice because the excavation did not match the location or scope of the approved project. Grace followed with a formal cease and desist and evidence preservation letter. It demanded that Silver Pines stop entering the ranch and make no attempt to remove or conceal the culvert, altered map, work logs, emails, or invoices. Restoration would have to wait until the site had been fully examined and a safe plan approved. Valerie answered within hours. She called the 2004 plan obsolete and claimed the trench restored a historic overflow route that modern records had failed to capture. She also warned that Silver Pines would hold me responsible if Crescent Lake dropped far enough to damage its pumps. We now had certified records, measurements, and a title search. But we also had an open trench that was still diverting water. Before dark, I mounted 2 battery-powered cameras near the fence opening and aimed one toward the culvert. At 11:43 that night, my phone alerted me to movement. A pickup without headlights rolled through the opening, and a man in a reflective vest walked directly toward the orange pipe. I opened the camera feed instead of driving toward the creek. The man knelt beside the culvert, removed a steel pin from a temporary control plate, and pulled the plate upward. Water surged east with enough force to shake the orange pipe. His vest carried the same contractor logo I had photographed on the first morning. I saved the recording in 3 places and sent copies to Grace and the county inspector. The pickup left 12 minutes later. By sunrise, the downstream channel had lost another 2 inches while fresh erosion appeared around the new cut. I did not touch the plate. Whoever had returned after the stop work notice had created evidence clearer than anything I could have staged. The practical damage kept accumulating. The cattle crossing turned into a shelf of loose gravel above a muddy drop. I added temporary panels to keep the herd away and paid a driver to refill the rented tanks. The northern pasture was being grazed faster than planned, and dust hung over the service lane whenever I moved feed. I logged every delivery, hour of labor, damaged panel, and acre taken out of rotation. Silver Pines responded publicly before it responded to Grace. Residents received a board message claiming that one neighboring landowner was blocking emergency infrastructure and placing homes at risk of flooding. It did not name me, but a photograph of Alder Creek made the target obvious. By afternoon, strangers were leaving messages at the ranch office demanding that I stop stealing the neighborhood's water. Grace told me not to answer them. She sent the HOA's attorney the night footage, the stop work notice, and a deadline to disable the diversion under county supervision. Valerie rejected the demand. She insisted the worker had only secured equipment against storm damage, even though no storm had been forecast. 2 days later, the contractor foreman called me. His name was Owen Dale. He said his company had suspended the job after receiving Grace's preservation letter and had retained its daily logs, machine data, and instructions. He would not discuss everything without his employer's attorney present, but he corrected one detail Valerie had repeated. She never called it flood control when she hired us, Owen said. The work order called it an emergency lake feed cut. Grace arranged for Owen's records to be preserved formally. One daily entry listed the coordinates Valerie had supplied. They matched Jordan's survey location inside Cedar Hollow. Another entry recorded her instruction to use the county-stamped sheet included in the HOA's project packet. The crew had assumed the board possessed the necessary access rights. Ruth Bell, the HOA treasurer, contacted Grace after seeing the night footage. She provided a board packet from 6 months earlier, including minutes and an engineering memorandum about Crescent Lake. The engineer had found that water was escaping through sections of the aging liner. He recommended draining part of the lake, replacing the damaged material, and rebuilding one shoreline seam. The estimated repair was expensive enough to require a special assessment. Meeting notes showed Valerie arguing that visible construction and a drained lake would depress sale prices during the summer season. In a later discussion, she proposed finding an outside water supplement that would maintain the lake until the board could postpone the repair again. The minutes did not specifically authorize trespassing on my ranch. Several board members had asked whether any off-site work required an easement review. No answer appeared in the packet. She was not protecting homes from a documented flood. She was trying to keep Crescent Lake full without asking residents to pay for the real repair. Grace warned Ruth to retain the original electronic files so their dates and source could later be authenticated. We treated the packet as a lead, not a magical confession. The county plan, title search, survey, contractor records, and physical damage had to support one another. Meanwhile, a restoration specialist inspected the creek under Jordan's supervision. His preliminary estimate covered removal of the orange culvert, rebuilding the 4-foot cut, stabilizing both banks, and restoring the cattle crossing. Added to the tanks, livestock movement, lost pasture use, survey, and legal work, the costs were already clearly substantial. Grace offered Silver Pines one final opportunity to stop the flow voluntarily and negotiate supervised restoration. Its attorney replied that the HOA would defend its historic drainage rights and seek reimbursement from me for any harm to Crescent Lake. That answer ended the waiting. Grace completed a verified complaint for trespass, unauthorized diversion, declaratory relief, restoration damages, and temporary and permanent injunctions. I signed it at her conference table, while a photograph of the orange culvert lay beside the signature page. The next morning, she filed the case and requested an emergency hearing. The emergency hearing took place 4 days after filing. Grace did not ask the judge to decide ownership of the creek or award damages on an incomplete record. She asked for a narrow order that would prevent either side from changing the site while the court considered the evidence. The HOA's attorney argued that closing the control plate could lower Crescent Lake and interfere with what he called an implied drainage system. Grace answered with the certified county plan, Jordan's survey, the stop work notice, and my night recording. After hearing both sides, the judge ordered Silver Pines to stay off Cedar Hollow Ranch and prohibited anyone from excavating, removing evidence, or adjusting the culvert. The water would remain at its existing setting until a hydrologist could recommend a safe temporary measure. It was not a final victory. It was breathing room. Within a week, the HOA filed an answer denying trespass and asserting that the trench followed a historic overflow route. It also claimed the subdivision had relied on that drainage pattern long enough to create rights that were not shown in my title search. Grace expected those arguments. What mattered now was testing them against records and sworn testimony. Discovery reached places Valerie's public letters never had. The HOA produced board emails, contractor invoices, permit attachments, engineering correspondence, and several versions of the drainage map. Metadata showed the eastbound blue line had been added to a PDF 3 days before the contractor received it. The county stamp had come from the valid clubhouse culvert sheet. One email from Valerie instructed the property manager to include the stamped page because the contractor needed proof the county was already on board. A reply asked whether Cedar Hollow had granted access. Valerie answered that the creek was part of the watershed and that waiting for another legal review would allow the lake to fall during the selling season. The contractor invoice created a second contradiction. Its description read, "Supplemental lake inlet excavation, not flood protection or restoration of an old channel." Machine data placed the excavator at Jordan's surveyed coordinates, and Owen's signed daily log recorded Valerie's instructions at the site. Owen gave his deposition with the contractor's attorney present. He admitted the crew never saw an easement or a document signed by me. Valerie had walked the foreman to the fence opening, pointed east toward Crescent Lake, and told them the HOA had secured every approval. Owen identified the night worker as an employee sent back after Valerie complained that the plate was restricting flow. His company had not known about the county stop work notice until the following morning. Elise Harper authenticated the county file. She explained that the 2004 plan remained the approved subdivision record and that the clubhouse permit authorized no work on Cedar Hollow. She did not offer an opinion about private water rights. Her testimony established only what the county had approved and what it had not. Valerie's deposition lasted most of a day. At first, she repeated that the trench restored a historic feeder channel. Grace placed the pre-development aerial photographs beside the original plan and asked Valerie to identify that channel. She could not. When asked why the HOA used a permit for another location, Valerie said she believed one county approval could cover related drainage maintenance. "Did Caleb Ward ever give Silver Pines permission to enter his ranch?" Grace asked. "Not directly," Valerie replied. "We did not believe his permission was necessary." That answer did not decide the case, but it removed any suggestion that the crew had entered by mistake. The engineering records caused the board to fracture. Ruth's packet was confirmed by the HOA's own electronic archive. 2 members testified that they had requested an easement review and believed Valerie would obtain one before any off-site work began. Another admitted the board was worried about a special assessment and the appearance of a partially drained lake during summer home sales. Grace retained hydrologist Dr. Evan Price to examine the creek, soil, lake records, and rainfall history. His testing found no established channel running east before the excavation. The natural southern course was stable. Crescent Lake's declining level matched seepage documented in the HOA engineer's liner report, not any recent change on my ranch. Dr. Price designed a temporary bypass that would return most of Alder Creek to its southern bed without causing a sudden release or destroying evidence. Under the court's order, a neutral contractor installed it while Jordan documented every step. For the first time in weeks, water covered the bottom of my steel reference post again. The HOA continued arguing that seasonal overflow and neighborhood reliance justified permanent access. Grace prepared to answer with the complete chain: deed, title report, survey, county plan, permit file, physical photographs, contractor records, board communications, and hydrology. On the evening before the preliminary injunction hearing, she arranged the exhibits across a conference table in that order. The altered map sat near the center, no longer looking powerful. It looked isolated. "Tomorrow," Grace said, "they have to explain how all of these records can be wrong at the same time." The courtroom held a wooden witness stand, 2 long tables, and a cart of records. That suited our case. Grace showed how each document answered a different question. My deed and title report established what was recorded. Jordan's survey located the excavation against that description. The county plan showed the approved drainage design. The permit file showed what Silver Pines had actually been authorized to build. Photographs and machine data documented what its contractor did instead. Emails, invoices, and testimony explained who ordered it and why. Jordan testified first. Using his field notes and certified survey, he walked the court from the Southwest Monument through the control points to Alder Creek. The nearest edge of the unauthorized trench lay 198 feet inside Cedar Hollow Ranch. He explained the 4-foot bank cut and how the new grade intercepted the ordinary flow before it continued south. The HOA's attorney suggested that a surveyed boundary could not determine where water had historically traveled. Jordan agreed. He had not been hired to decide water rights or reconstruct centuries of hydrology. He had been hired to locate the excavation, and on that question his measurements were clear. A lease authenticated the 2004 plan and the clubhouse culvert permit. The original blue line curved south. No approved sheet placed a channel through my pasture toward Crescent Lake. When asked whether plans could ever be amended, she said they could, but an amendment would appear in the official file. This one did not. Owen identified the work order, daily logs, machine coordinates, and altered project packet. He described Valerie leading the crew to my fence opening and directing the eastbound cut. His testimony did not make the contractor blameless, but it established that the crew had acted on the HOA's specific location and assurance of authority. Dr. Price tied the physical and documentary evidence together. Soil profiles and pre-development photographs showed no established eastbound channel. Rainfall records did not support an emergency flood condition. The fall in Crescent Lake matched the seepage described months earlier in the HOA's own liner report. Diverting Alder Creek added water to the lake, but it did not repair the failing liner. Silver Pines presented an engineer who said water sometimes spread east across low ground during major storms. That was possible, Dr. Price acknowledged. Seasonal overflow, however, was not the same as a permanent excavated inlet with a 4-foot cut and control plate. The HOA also argued that maintaining Crescent Lake benefited the entire subdivision and that losing water could damage pumps and property values. Grace did not dispute those concerns. She asked what flood study authorized the new trench. There was none. She asked what recorded document allowed the HOA to enter Cedar Hollow. There was none. She asked why the board used a permit for a clubhouse culvert rather than applying for the work it actually wanted. No witness provided a consistent answer. Valerie testified that she believed the watershed relationship made permission unnecessary. Grace showed her the email asking about an easement review, then the later message about avoiding a special assessment during the selling season. Valerie said she had been trying to protect residents from financial harm. That explained her motive. It did not create an easement or change the permit. At the end of the hearing, the judge ruled from the bench. He did not declare that I owned every drop in Alder Creek. He found that I had shown a strong likelihood of succeeding on my claims involving unauthorized entry, excavation, and diversion across my land. The HOA's theories did not justify maintaining a constructed channel while the case continued. The preliminary injunction barred Silver Pines and its agents from entering Cedar Hollow without written permission or court-approved restoration access. It required the temporary bypass to remain in place and directed the parties to develop a supervised plan, returning the ordinary flow to the documented southern bed. The HOA could inspect its pumps and lake from its own property, but it could not draw water through the new trench. Outside the courthouse, Valerie passed me without speaking. The orange culvert remained buried in my pasture, and the crossing was still damaged. The order stopped the harm from growing. It did not erase what had happened. The ruling changed the negotiations. Over the next 2 months, the HOA received final restoration estimates, professional invoices, and records of temporary livestock costs. Its board also learned that taking the case through trial would require defending the altered map, the night entry, and Valerie's sworn admission that I had never granted access. Mediation lasted 10 hours. Silver Pines did not admit every allegation, and I did not demand control over water beyond my property claims. We focused on relief that could be measured and enforced. The final agreement became a stipulated judgment. It included a permanent injunction prohibiting Silver Pines from entering Cedar Hollow or diverting Alder Creek without a written grant. The HOA agreed to record an acknowledgement that it held no drainage easement across the ranch. Restoration would be performed by a qualified contractor under Jordan and Dr. Price's supervision. The payment totaled $96,400, $38,600 for channel and bank restoration, $7,850 for temporary water and livestock relocation, $14,200 for surveying and hydrology, $9,750 for damaged use and repairs, and $26,000 as a negotiated contribution toward legal expenses. The amounts reflected documented losses. Silver Pines also accepted responsibility for maintaining Crescent Lake from within its own boundaries. The board could repair the liner, alter its budget, or assess its members, but it could not make my creek the substitute for those decisions. 3 weeks after the judgment was entered, a neutral excavation crew returned to Cedar Hollow. This time, Jordan marked the limits, Dr. Price checked the flow plan, and I opened the gate myself. The excavator lowered its bucket beside the orange culvert, not to deepen the lie, but to remove it. The crew exposed the orange culvert section by section, photographed it in place, and lifted it onto a flatbed. They filled the unauthorized trench with compacted native soil, rebuilt the 4-foot bank cut, and armored the vulnerable bends with stone chosen to match the existing creek bed. Dr. Price checked the grade before water was released through the restored southern channel. For several minutes, Alder Creek moved slowly around the fresh stones. Then the flow settled into the route shown on the old county plan. Water reached the cattle crossing before noon and covered the bottom of the steel reference post I had driven into the mud on the first day. Restoration took another 3 weeks. The crew planted willow stakes and native grasses along both banks. I rebuilt the crossing with a stable gravel base, removed the temporary panels, and returned the 34 cattle to their regular pasture rotation. The rented tanks left on a truck the following morning. Silver Pines handled Crescent Lake from its own side of the boundary. The HOA approved the liner repair it had postponed, adjusted its reserve budget, and adopted a rule requiring title review and written access authority before any future project crossed subdivision property. The lake remained lower during construction, but no homes flooded and no pumps were destroyed. Grace sent me a certified copy of the recorded judgment after the final payment cleared. I filed it beside the deed, survey, and county plan in the same fireproof cabinet my father had used. The new record stated that Silver Pines held no drainage easement across Cedar Hollow. Future boards would not have to trust anyone's memory, whether mine, Valerie's, or someone else's. Valerie resigned before the next annual meeting and did not seek another board position. I never spoke with her again. Ruth stayed long enough to help organize the new records policy, then stepped down after her term ended. When the restoration contractor finished, he asked whether I wanted the removed culvert hauled away. I kept one clean section beside the ranch workshop. Its bright orange surface had faded under the sun, but it still reminded me how easily a laminated map and an official-looking stamp could be mistaken for authority. I had not protected Cedar Hollow by shouting louder than Valerie. I had protected it by recording the trench, saving the letters, measuring the damage, and letting each piece of evidence support the next. The creek turning south again was quieter than any courtroom ruling, but it was the part that mattered most. If you believe property rights are defended through patience, evidence, and persistence, subscribe for more stories where the documents finally get their day in court.